The thunderous boom of Ottoman cannons echoed across the Danube Valley as dawn broke on July 14th. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha stood atop a hill overlooking the ancient city of Vienna, his silk robes billowing in the morning wind. Behind him stretched an army of over 150,000 men, the largest force the Ottoman Empire had ever assembled for a European campaign. The crescent banners of Islam fluttered ominously in the breeze, casting shadows that seemed to reach toward the very heart of Christendom. Vienna, the golden city that had stood as the eastern bastion of the Holy Roman Empire for centuries, now trembled beneath the weight of impending doom. Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, the city's military commander, watched from the ramparts as the Ottoman war machine spread across the landscape like a dark tide. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, a sea of turbans, scimitars, and siege engines that promised either glory or annihilation. The Ottoman advance had been swift and merciless. Throughout the spring and early summer of 1680, Kara Mustafa's forces had swept through Hungary, crushing all resistance in their path. Fortresses that had withstood previous sieges crumbled before the might of the Sultan's artillery. The roads leading to Vienna were littered with the remnants of Habsburg garrisons, their banners torn and bloodied, their dreams of victory reduced to ash and memory. Emperor Leopold I had fled Vienna in early July, taking with him the imperial court and leaving behind only a skeleton force of 11,000 defenders. The emperor's departure had sent shockwaves through the city's population. Panic gripped the streets as citizens realized that their sovereign had abandoned them to face the Ottoman storm alone. Yet Count Starhemberg remained, his jaw set with grim determination, his eyes blazing with defiance that would not be extinguished. The Ottoman siege began in earnest on July 17. Kara Mustafa, a man of considerable military genius but unlimited ambition, had convinced Sultan Mehmed IV that Vienna was the key to unlocking all of Europe. "Take Vienna," he had declared before the Sultan's court, "and Paris will follow within the year." The Grand Vizier's vision extended far beyond the walls of this Austrian city. He dreamed of Ottoman banners flying over the cathedrals of Rome and the palaces of Versailles. As the siege engines rolled into position and the first trenches were dug, the defenders of Vienna prepared for what many believed would be their final stand. The city's walls, though formidable, had not been designed to withstand the advanced artillery that the Ottomans now possessed. Each cannonball that crashed into the ancient stones seemed to chip away not just at the fortifications, but at the very soul of Christian Europe. The stakes could not have been higher. If Vienna fell, the road to Germany would lie open, and the Ottoman Empire would achieve what it had failed to accomplish in its previous attempts at European conquest. The balance of power that had defined the continent for centuries hung in the balance, suspended between the thunderous roar of Ottoman cannons and the desperate prayers of Vienna's defenders. The relentless pounding of Ottoman artillery had continued for 6 weeks, turning sections of Vienna's mighty walls into rubble and dust. By early September, the city's defenses were crumbling under the sustained bombardment. Count Starhemberg walked the ramparts each dawn, his weathered face betraying the strain of command as he surveyed the ever-widening breaches in the fortifications. The smell of gunpowder and death hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid smoke that rose from the burning sections of the city. Kara Mustafa's strategy was as methodical as it was devastating. The Grand Vizier had divided his massive army into specialized units, each designed to exploit different weaknesses in Vienna's defenses. The famous Janissaries, the elite infantry corps of the Ottoman Empire, had established forward positions within bowshot of the walls. Their distinctive white felt caps and gleaming scimitars struck fear into the hearts of the defenders, who knew well the reputation of these warrior monks who had conquered Constantinople 2 centuries earlier. The Ottoman siege works were a marvel of military engineering. Zigzag trenches snaked toward the city walls, allowing the attackers to advance undercover, while their sappers worked tirelessly to undermine the foundations. The sound of pickaxes and shovels echoed through the night as Turkish engineers dug tunnels beneath the bastions, packing them with explosive charges that would soon reduce entire sections of wall to scattered stone. According to historical accounts detailed in the Cambridge History of the Ottoman Empire, the siege had taken on characteristics of a war of attrition that favored the vastly superior Ottoman numbers. Food supplies within Vienna dwindled rapidly as the blockade tightened its grip. Citizens who had once dined on fresh bread and roasted meats now subsisted on thin gruel and whatever scraps could be found. The city's horses, so vital for communication and transport, were slaughtered one by one to feed the starving population. Yet the defenders refused to surrender. Count Starhemberg had received word that relief forces were being assembled, though he dared not reveal the details to his men for fear of raising false hopes. The coded messages that occasionally slipped through the Ottoman lines spoke of a grand alliance forming beyond the Danube, but whether this coalition would arrive in time remained desperately uncertain. The psychological warfare was perhaps as devastating as the physical siege. Ottoman forces would parade captured Austrian banners before the walls, displaying the heads of defeated commanders on pikes as a warning to those who dared resist. The sound of Turkish drums and cymbals echoed through the night, designed to deprive the defenders of sleep and weaken their resolve. The haunting call of the muezzin from the Ottoman camp served as a constant reminder that an alien faith now dominated the land surrounding Vienna. By September 8th, the situation had become critical. The outer defenses had been breached in multiple locations, and Ottoman assault troops were fighting in the streets of the city's suburbs. The Ravelin, a crucial defensive position, had fallen after a fierce battle that lasted 3 days. Count Starhemberg ordered the burning of the outer districts to deny the Ottomans shelter and supplies, but the smoke that rose from the flames seemed to signal Vienna's approaching doom. The Grand Vizier sensed victory within his grasp. His spies reported that the city's garrison was reduced to fewer than 4,000 effective fighters, while civilians cowered in cellars and churches, praying for deliverance that seemed increasingly unlikely. Kara Mustafa began planning for the final assault, confident that within days the crescent banner would fly over the spires of St. Stephen's Cathedral. While Vienna's defenders grimly held their crumbling positions, a remarkable transformation was taking place across the battlefields of Europe. Pope Innocent XI, recognizing the existential threat posed by the Ottoman advance, had issued a papal bull calling for a new crusade. The pontiff's message resonated through the courts of Christian Europe with unprecedented urgency. This was not merely a struggle for territorial control, but a battle for the very survival of Western civilization. King John III Sobieski of Poland emerged as the unlikely champion of this desperate cause. The Polish monarch, known for his military genius and his distinctive winged hussar cavalry, had initially been reluctant to commit his forces to what many considered a hopeless venture. However, the fall of Vienna would leave Poland dangerously exposed to Ottoman expansion, and Sobieski understood that the fate of his kingdom was inextricably linked to the survival of the Austrian capital. The diplomatic maneuvering that preceded the relief of Vienna was as complex as any military campaign. Charles V of Lorraine, the Holy Roman Emperors, worked tirelessly to forge an alliance between the often fractious German states. Bavaria, Saxony, and numerous smaller principalities agreed to contribute troops and resources to the relief effort, setting aside centuries of mutual suspicion in the face of the Ottoman threat. The logistical challenges were immense. Assembling an army capable of challenging the Ottoman siege required unprecedented coordination between nations that had frequently been at war with each other. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles, while diplomatic couriers raced between capitals to finalize agreements and coordinate movements. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. Any delay or miscommunication could doom Vienna and potentially alter the course of European history. As referenced in military historians' accounts from the Journal of Military History, the Ottoman intelligence network had initially underestimated the scope of the Christian coalition forming against them. Kara Mustafa, focused on the immediate prize of Vienna, had failed to adequately prepare for the possibility of a major relief force. This oversight would prove to be one of the most costly military miscalculations in Ottoman history. By early September, the various elements of the relief army were converging on the Danube region. King John Sobieski's Polish forces, numbering approximately 25,000 men, represented the largest single contingent. The famous winged hussars, Poland's elite heavy cavalry, had traveled hundreds of miles to join the campaign. Their distinctive armor and fearsome reputation preceded them, and their arrival boosted the morale of the entire Christian coalition. The imperial forces under Charles of Lorraine added another 30,000 soldiers to the growing army. These battle-hardened veterans of the Hungarian campaigns brought with them the latest in military technology and tactics. German contingents from Bavaria and Saxony contributed additional troops, while smaller forces from various principalities swelled the ranks of what was becoming the largest Christian army assembled in generations. The challenge now was coordination. The relief army represented a dozen different nationalities, each with their own languages, customs, and military traditions. King Sobieski and Charles of Lorraine spent countless hours in planning sessions, working out the intricate details of command structure and tactical deployment. The Polish king's experience in fighting the Ottomans proved invaluable, as he understood their strengths and weaknesses better than any other European commander. Time was running desperately short. Intelligence reports from Vienna indicated that the city's defenses were on the verge of collapse. The Ottoman siege trenches had advanced to within yards of the main walls, and explosive charges were being prepared for a final devastating assault. The relief army would have to move with unprecedented speed and precision if they were to arrive before Vienna's last defenders were overwhelmed by the Ottoman tide. The relief army's advance toward Vienna began on September 8, 1683, under a sky heavy with the promise of autumn storms. King John Sobieski, resplendent in his gilded armor and flowing cape, rode at the head of the Polish contingent as the massive column wound its way through the forests of Lower Austria. Behind him stretched a river of steel and determination, over 60,000 men united by a common cause that transcended national boundaries and ancient rivalries. The march was fraught with peril beyond the obvious military challenges. The Ottoman cavalry, renowned for their speed and tactical flexibility, constantly harassed the advancing columns. Turkish light horse would appear suddenly from the tree line, loose a volley of arrows, then disappeared before the Christian forces could respond effectively. These hit-and-run tactics were designed to slow the relief army's progress and disrupt their carefully coordinated advance. Charles of Lorraine, commanding the imperial forces, proved to be an able partner to the Polish king. The two commanders had developed a mutual respect based on their shared understanding of the stakes involved. Their combined forces moved with remarkable discipline, maintaining formation despite the challenging terrain and constant enemy harassment. The coordination between Polish, Austrian, and German units was unprecedented in European military history. Intelligence reached the relief army on September 10th that Vienna's situation had become desperate. Ottoman sappers had successfully detonated charges beneath the Labelle bastion, creating a massive breach in the city's defenses. Only the heroic efforts of Count Starhemberg's garrison had prevented the Turks from exploiting this gap and pouring into the city. The defenders were now fighting street by street, their ammunition running low and their numbers dwindling with each passing hour. The psychological impact of the approaching relief army began to manifest itself in unexpected ways. Ottoman scouts reported increasing numbers of Christian banners visible from the hills surrounding Vienna, and rumors spread through the Turkish camp that a massive enemy force was approaching. Kara Mustafa, however, remained confident in his ability to take the city before any relief could arrive. His assessment of the situation would prove fatally flawed, as documented in contemporary Ottoman chronicles referenced in the Historical Journal of Islamic Studies. The Grand Vizier's focus on Vienna had blinded him to the broader strategic picture. The massive Ottoman army, while formidable in its siege capabilities, was poorly positioned to face a major field battle. The Turkish forces were spread out in siege lines, with their heavy artillery facing the city rather than the approaching threat from the west. The relief army's final approach to Vienna required crossing the Danube River, an operation that would leave them vulnerable to Ottoman attack. King Sobieski and Charles of Lorraine spent hours studying maps and consulting with local guides to identify the best crossing points. The decision was made to ford the river at multiple locations simultaneously, preventing the Ottomans from concentrating their forces against a single crossing point. On September 11th, the Christian forces began their river crossing under cover of darkness. The Polish winged hussars, their armor muffled with cloth to prevent noise, led the way across the swift-flowing waters. Behind them came the infantry, their weapons held high above their heads. As they struggled against the current, the operation was a masterpiece of military coordination, with each unit crossing at precisely the designated time and location. By dawn on September 12th, the entire relief army had successfully crossed the Danube and was deploying on the Kahlenberg Heights overlooking Vienna. The sight that greeted them was both inspiring and terrifying. Below lay the ancient city, its walls broken and smoking, surrounded by the vast Ottoman encampment that stretched as far as the eye could see. The crescent banners of Islam flew proudly over siege works that had brought one of Europe's greatest cities to the brink of destruction. The moment of decision had arrived. Within hours, the fate of Vienna, and perhaps all of Christian Europe, would be decided on the fields below. The relief army's commanders knew that they would have only one opportunity to break the Ottoman siege. Failure would mean not just the fall of Vienna, but the potential collapse of the entire Habsburg Empire and the opening of Central Europe to Ottoman conquest. September 12, 1683 dawned crisp and clear, with the first rays of sunlight illuminating the banners of the Christian relief army as they took their positions on the Kahlenberg Heights. King John Sobieski, now serving as the supreme commander of the Allied forces, surveyed the battlefield below with the eye of a master strategist. The Ottoman army, caught between the anvil of Vienna's walls and the hammer of the relief force, would soon face a challenge unlike any in their military history. The battle plan that emerged from the War Council was audacious in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. The Allied forces would advance in a massive crescent formation, where the Polish winged hussars held in reserve for the decisive moment. The Imperial forces under Charles of Lorraine would attack the Ottoman left flank, while the German contingents engaged the center. The Polish king himself would lead the final, crushing cavalry charge that would shatter the Ottoman siege once and for all. At precisely 6 o'clock in the morning, the Christian artillery opened fire. The thunderous roar of cannons echoed across the battlefield as hundreds of guns hurled their iron projectiles into the Ottoman siege works. The Turkish forces, who had spent months focused on reducing Vienna's walls, now found themselves under attack from an unexpected direction. Panic began to spread through the Ottoman ranks as they realized the magnitude of the threat approaching from the west. Kara Mustafa, awakened by the sound of artillery, emerged from his silk pavilion to witness a sight that would haunt him for the remainder of his brief life. The hills above Vienna were alive with the movement of enemy forces, 60,000 Christian soldiers advancing in perfect formation, their banners streaming in the morning breeze. The Grand Vizier had committed the classic military error of fighting a war on two fronts, and the consequences were now becoming devastatingly apparent. The Ottoman response was swift but disorganized. Turkish commanders, trained in the arts of siege warfare, struggled to redeploy their forces to meet this new threat. The famous Janissaries, elite troops who had conquered cities across 3 continents, found themselves fighting a defensive battle for which they were unprepared. Their muskets, so effective against city walls, proved inadequate against the coordinated advance of European heavy cavalry and infantry. according to battlefield accounts preserved in the Polish military archives and referenced in the European Historical Review. The turning point came at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Ottoman center, weakened by hours of fighting against the German infantry, began to show signs of wavering. King Sobieski, who had been watching the battle unfold from his command position, recognized that the moment for decisive action had arrived. The charge of the Polish winged hussars remains one of the most spectacular military actions in European history. 18,000 cavalry, led by the Polish king himself, descended from the Kahlenberg Heights like an avalanche of steel and determination. The distinctive wings attached to their backs created a thunderous rushing sound that could be heard across the entire battlefield. The psychological impact on the Ottoman forces was immediate and devastating. The sight of the winged hussars in full charge was both beautiful and terrifying. Their lances, 15 feet long and tipped with razor-sharp steel, were lowered in perfect unison as they approached the Ottoman lines. The ground shook beneath the hooves of their massive war, and the air filled with the battle cries of men who believed they were fighting for the very survival of their faith and civilization. The Ottoman lines shattered like glass beneath the impact of the Polish charge. Turkish soldiers, who had fought bravely throughout the day, broke and ran in the face of this overwhelming assault. The famous Janissaries, the backbone of Ottoman military power, were scattered and demoralized. Within minutes, what had been an organized army became a fleeing mob, abandoning their weapons and their wounded in their desperate flight from the battlefield. Kara Mustafa, witnessing the collapse of his grand vision, ordered a general retreat. The Ottoman siege of Vienna, which had lasted for 60 days and brought the city to the brink of surrender, was over. The crescent banners that had flown so proudly over the Turkish camps were now trampled in the mud, while the cross of Christianity once again held dominion over the ancient capital of the Holy Roman Empire. The aftermath of the Battle of Vienna revealed the true magnitude of the Ottoman defeat. As the sun set on September 12, 1683, the vast Turkish camp that had surrounded the city lay abandoned and burning. Kara Mustafa's retreating army left behind a treasure trove of military equipment, supplies, and wealth that would take days to fully catalogue. The Grand Vizier himself, his dreams of European conquest shattered, fled southward with the remnants of his once mighty force. King John Sobieski, his armor still bearing the marks of battle, rode through the gates of Vienna to a hero's welcome. The city's inhabitants, who had endured 2 months of terror and deprivation, poured into the streets to celebrate their deliverance. Count Starhemberg, the stalwart defender who had held the walls against impossible odds, formally surrendered command of the city to the Polish king in a ceremony that would be remembered for generations. The human cost of the siege had been staggering. Vienna's population had been reduced from over 100,000 to fewer than 60,000, with many civilians having died from starvation, disease, or Ottoman bombardment. The city's defenses lay in ruins, and entire districts had been reduced to smoking rubble. Yet the spirit of the defenders remained unbroken, their sacrifice having preserved not just their city but the broader cause of Christian Europe. The Ottoman retreat quickly became a rout, harried by Christian cavalry and demoralized by their stunning defeat. The Turkish forces abandoned position after position as they fell back toward Hungary. Fortresses that had taken months to capture were evacuated in days, their garrisons fleeing rather than face the advancing Allied army. The carefully constructed Ottoman defensive network in Hungary began to collapse like a house of cards. The political ramifications of the victory extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. The successful defense of Vienna marked the beginning of the end of Ottoman expansion into Europe. The myth of Turkish invincibility, carefully cultivated over centuries of conquest, had been shattered in a single day. European powers that had long paid tribute to the Sultan now began to reassess their relationships with the Ottoman Empire. As documented in diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Vatican's secret archives and referenced in the Journal of Early Modern History, Pope Innocent XI hailed the victory as a triumph of Christian unity over Islamic conquest. The pontiff's vision of a renewed crusading spirit had been vindicated, and the success at Vienna encouraged further military cooperation between Catholic and Protestant European powers against their common Ottoman enemy. The fate of Kara Mustafa himself became a cautionary tale about the price of failure in Ottoman politics. The Grand Vizier, who had promised Sultan Mehmed IV that Vienna would fall within weeks, found himself facing the wrath of his sovereign. On December 25, Kara Mustafa was executed by a silk court in Belgrade, his ambitious dreams having cost the Ottoman Empire its reputation for invincibility and its hopes of European domination. The victory at Vienna initiated what historians would later call the Great Turkish War, a 16-year conflict that would see the Ottoman Empire lose most of its European territories. The Holy League, formed in the aftermath of the battle, would drive Turkish forces from Hungary, Transylvania, and much of the Balkans. The tide of history had turned, and the Ottoman Empire would never again threaten the heart of Europe. The Battle of Vienna thus stands as one of history's great turning points, a moment when the fate of civilizations hung in the balance and was decided by courage, unity, and the thunderous charge of 80,000 winged hussars. The city that had nearly fallen to the crescent now stood as a symbol of Christian resistance and European unity, its deliverance marking the beginning of a new age in which the balance of power would shift decisively in favor of the Western world. The echoes of that September day in 1683 would resonate through the corridors of power for generations to come, reminding future leaders that sometimes the fate of nations depends not on the size of armies or the strength of walls, but on the courage of those who refuse to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds.